Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 105, and this week's pick, since I had announced it on which was last week's album of the week episode, which was episode number 104, which was for To Hell With God from Deicide. At the end of that video, I did announce what was going to be this week's album of the week. It is the 10th studio album from Anvil. It is Plenty of Power, which on the day that I'm recording this, because of you pretty much are watching this on pretty much Monday the 5th, but I'm recording this on pretty much Saturday the 3rd. This will be the 20th anniversary for this album, because it was originally released on April 3rd, 2001. Through, of course, the labels such as Hypnotic in Canada and Massacre in Europe. Yes, there really wasn't any US release until at least the End Records decided to release it here in the US. Alright, even though you had to at least get it as import. Alright, so Plenty of Power. Where do we really begin? Obviously, this, I'll get to some of the lineup for this album. But this is following 1999's Speed of Sound, which was a fairly solid album. I mean, the thing is, though, with Anvil, there never really was a true split up with this band. They still were able to at least to play together. They never really fully split up. Even if there were sometimes gaps between recordings and so on. Even like, again, back in the 1980s, like there was a big gap between Forged in Fire and Strength of Steel. They never really split up. It's just there was a lot of contract issues and so on, but they were able to at least play a lot of clubs and shows and so on. They were still able to. It's just trying to get a contract was usually at least a pain in the ass for at least Lips and Rob Reiner and the rest of the two guys who at least were in there, Dave Allison and Ian Dixon. So, but they still kept going within the 90s. Again, their first album they had released in the 1990s was Worth the Wait. Then, of course, went into Plugged In Permanent, which actually saw the debut of the lineup that is on this album, which were Steve Lips Kudo on vocals and guitar, Ivan Hurd, I think is the better way, Ivan Hurd on guitars, Glenn Five on bass, and Rob Reiner. That, again, debuted on 1996's Plugged In Permanent and pretty much lasted, and I'll definitely get into how long this lineup at least lasted. So, this is finally about where we head into Plenty of Power, which had to at least been recorded in at least sometime in 2000, and it was all recorded at Studio Victor in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And it was produced by Pierre Remillard. I don't know, who knows, I'm probably fucking up a lot of the names for here. Anvil and Torsten Hartmann. So there's the producers for this album, which let me go back into Speed of Sound, because it's probably, I think, the same crew, it seems like. Actually, yes, kind of almost the same crew. Pierre Remillard, or Millard, at least was the one, at least had been producing, or at least helping, at least for recording some of the stuff, I guess, since, let me go back into Absolutely No Alternative here. No, it seems like he debuted with Speed of Sound. So, there we go. So there's your team, and so finally let's get into Plenty of Power, which then finally saw release on April 3rd, 2001 through the labels such as Hypnotic in Canada, like I've stated, and Massacre Records in Europe, like I've stated. And that's where finally we'll head into at least the track listing for this album, because I'm going to be talking about two of these releases, because there's at least a track listing difference here with at least two of these pressings. So, first off, for your original just 10 songs here, because usually there is at least 11 songs for both of these releases, but there's usually is a song difference. So, these 10 songs what at least would be that or usually are on both of these albums. Pretty much consists of the title track opening up the album, Groove Science, Ball of Fire, The Creep, Computer Drone, Beat the Law, Pro Wrestling, Siren of the Sea, Disgruntled, and Real World. Now, finally, when it comes to at least the 11th song, it's usually different on 2 of these pressings. The Hypnotic release in Canada featured a track called Left Behind, which was only at least was exclusive to this pressing, being the Canadian CD pressing through Hypnotic Records, and that's where the time length would be for this copy would have been 46 minutes and 34 seconds. So, but for the Massacre Records pressing in Europe, what would replace Left Behind would be Dirty Dorothy, which was, again, exclusive to the German CD pressings and LP pressings of this album. And the time length for this version would be 45 minutes and 43 seconds, so at least a minute shorter than the Hypnotic CD pressings from Canada. However, for the US pressings that was through the End Records, goes by the original Canadian copy of the album, which again included Left Behind. So no reissue of Plenty of Power will contain Dirty Dorothy. You will have to at least go and track down the Massacre CD's copy of this album, which again you can find for fairly cheap on Discogs. So there you go. So there's at least your track listing for this album. So, when it comes to Plenty of Power, given the different... Now, as far as my experience with listening to most of their albums, while Anvil can be considered one of the most consistent bands in the, at least in the metal genre, especially when it comes to heavy metal in general or speed metal, they were pretty consistent. However, when I'm listening to a lot of their material from at least from the 1980s and the 2000s to at least, or even the 1990s, at least the 80s and the 90s, there's at least a difference. There's a sound difference. Because of in the 1990s, and it seemed, and while Worth the Wait was at least continuing more of the sound of like Pound for Pound, which really kind of, after Strength of Steel, they wanted to definitely go to a more heavier approach. So they definitely were adopting more of a straight-up speed, even more almost thrashier speed metal sound. Even though it was still very much classic metal in heart and soul, it definitely, in terms of its attack, was a little faster. And Worth the Wait kind of continued it, but but some of the songs were a little bit more longer. So they actually kind of progressed a little bit with that album. But after that, beginning with the newer lineup consisting of Steve, Ivan, Glenn, and Rob, they beginning Unplugged and Permanent in 1996, they really decided to go for a more heavier approach to kind of at least, in a way, update a little bit their sound and a bit of their attack in the 1990s. While you can't really say they ever tried to go the more Pantera route, or even some cases the more death metal route of like Morbid Angel or Deicide or Cannibal Corpse or those kind of bands, they still decide to kind of thrashen up their sound. In some cases being almost on par with like either Slayer or Exodus, or or even at times Testament. They really wanted to go for, or even Razor, I think is the better example. They definitely they really thrashed up their sound, again, beginning with Plugged and Permanent in 1996, and that definitely at least transitioned into Absolutely No Alternative and then Speed of Sound. But here on Plenty of Power, which was their first album to be released here in the 2000s, while it still contains the sort of heavier, very down, I wouldn't say down-tuned approach, but they definitely were a lot heavier. They still kept that sound, that same guitar tone on that really began with Plugged and Permanent and so on. But musically, as far as the speed here, it's not nearly as aggressive as Speed of Sound. They definitely slowed down a lot of the pacing on here, even though it's still fast. It's still straight up Anvil style speed metal, but it's not nearly as breakneck speed or as just completely aggressive as like Plugged In Permanent or Speed of Sound. I mean, it's in terms of really trying to draw sort of at least sound comparisons. So they definitely kind of a little bit kind of brought back toned down a little bit of the speed here, but still plenty heavy. There's still plenty of crunching riffs on here. I mean, the opener title track, it's a good opener. It does good. You definitely get the good idea that, again, they're not really changing their sound. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but they're definitely showing that there's still enough piss and vinegar in their sound, and it really continues into at least Groove Science, which is a fine track. Ball of Fire might be one of my favorite songs off of here. The Creep. Now, this one's an interesting one. I do want at least take some time to talk about this track, because of every time I go back and listen to this album, and then I go and listen to some of the more later albums, it's something that a lot of people really tend to almost consider the song Swing Thing as like their first foray into the sort of almost kind of jazzy kind of beat almost. It seems like that they tend to almost consider that be like the first of really adding in more of that sort of jazzy kind of groove to their musical chops. I mean, they kind of flirted with a little bit on a song like Jackhammer off of, or even, what was the other song that I'm also thinking of too? Let me kind of go back to Metal on Metal here. Again, either, I would say Jackhammer. It seems like it kind of goes back to that. But the thing is, you really hear more of the jazzier feel on the Creep here, which again predates Swing Thing, and even other songs like, for example, off let's say Pounding the Pavement with Warming Up. They definitely take the more swing thing in terms of definitely coming up with the more pacing. But the Creep predates that. This is really, a lot of people tend to really overlook this track when trying to, when making comparisons, or at least trying to pinpoint the sort of beginnings of Anvil kind of flirting with that sort of swinging style groove and beat. I mean, Accept did it with Teach Us to Survive. However, again, that's Accept. But for Anvil, they really definitely began to really flirt with the sort of swing beat with the Creep here on Plenty of Power. So I definitely think it's I think it's a song that should not be overlooked. Because again, for any people once again to kind of to get my argument or my at least across is, don't be claiming that they first started flirting with the sort of swing style beat with Swing Thing off of Juggernaut of Justice. All right, they began flirting with that sort of beat since at least albums here with Plenty of Power with the Creep here. So let's definitely move on. Again, other fine songs off here would be Computer Drum, which is actually the longest song on this album. It actually clocks in at 6 minutes and 16 seconds. And again, they're the sort of themes of, let's say, what people now like to call boomer-like lyrics because of their complaining about technology. Again, gotta look back as far as Computer Drone on Plenty of Power, which is really kind of making the argument of how many people are so obsessed with computers and technology and are just completely glued to it and don't want to at least take some time away from their computers for that and at least be able to live life. Because again, the thing is, many people say, well, they lived in the 1970s and 80s. They grew up in a time where there barely was internet or computers or whatever. At the same time, is there really more to life than just looking at your fucking computer? And yes, I have to use my computers when, let's say, making video content and other shit, but recently, most of my time these days, these past year or so, I've been at least doing my best and looking away from the computer, and I mean putting it away in some cases, and just turning it off and letting it be. All right, and just taking a break from looking at it. All right, there's more to life than a goddamn computer. So in some cases, they may have a point. So even if you do not agree with it, you have to at least admire the fact that they are at least making a point, and you can't completely hate them for it. So whatever. So there you go, Computer Drone, which is a little slower, a little heavier track though, and it's fine. Beat the Laws, another fine song. Pro wrestling is definitely their ode to, well, that is professional wrestling. And it's actually one of my favorite songs. It's a heavier song, a little bit more mid-paced, but I actually dig it. I mean, some of the lyrics here and there, again, you got a lot of references to how wrestling holds and moves and so on. Again, I know some of these because I'm a wrestling fan. So a lot of this definitely, for sure, it really definitely reaches out at me. I really do kind of dig it. I mean, they actually kind of flirted with a lot of themes of wrestling in the past. Sounds like, for example, tag team off of Metal on Metal, which I don't know if it's more of a reference like maybe women's wrestling. I have no clue. Who knows if it was done in a dirty way, but I always kind of thought that since even trying to look at the lyrics, there's definitely some themes of wrestling in that song too. I mean, tag team. I mean, one of the biggest themes of wrestling is tag teams. So there you go. But it's a fine song. Siren of Sea I also kind of dig. Disgruntled. I mean, another fine song that definitely also speaks to those who obviously hate their fucking job or whatnot. And then we got Real Metal, which is probably the thrashiest song on this album for sure. This is the thrashiest. And this one, well, it's an ode to, well, metal and also to their past. I mean, one of the final lyrics for this, or at least the final lyric or lines to this track is from here: from hard and heavy to pound for pound, from worth the weight to speed of sound. Donington, Wacken, Bruges, in between. I don't know. I probably fucked up one of the names here. Again, still so much left unseen. But there you go. Again, all the references, some of their albums, and some of the places they played. Donington, because they actually played at the 1982 Monsters of Rock, which the headlining band for that show was, funny enough, was Status Quo. Even though you had Saxon also on that bill, and even Hawkwind. So it definitely is a reference to them playing at the 1982 Monsters of Rock, and then of course playing plenty of times at Wacken. And then, I don't know what Bruges is. Is that the one in Japan that they played at? I can't think of. I know that they definitely played at the festival that took place in Japan, which also had Bon Jovi, of all names, actually play on that one. So that's definitely kind of funny. Anvil and Bon Jovi on the same bill. Okay, whatever. So there you go. But it's a fine track, and that's pretty much the last official song. And then, of course, let's now talk about some of the two bonus tracks. Let's definitely talk about the one that's on the Hypnotic Records release in Canada, and also the N Records release here in the US, which, again, Left Behind. It's a more of a very slower paced song that definitely, in some cases, you can definitely can make some comparisons to other Anvil songs, like, for example, Thumb Hang, I think is probably the better example, because of, I mean, I almost was about to also try and draw comparisons to even the song Oh Jane off of Hard and Heavy, but the thing is, it's a little bit more faster in its pacing, a little more upbeat. Whereas this one's just a bit more sludgier in some cases. Again, it's still got that Black Sabbath or Bang inspired pace going on to it. It's still got that, where it's, I wouldn't say stoner, but it just has that pace going on to it. And it still was a very good track. I still like it. Again, other comparisons would be also to either the song World of Tomorrow off of Pounding the Pavement, or even Chemtrails off of Legal at Last, Or again, it's just really flirting with a sort of almost Black Sabbath style pacing to it. It's a good song. I do like it. Of course, then there's Forged in Fire, which also kind of had the same thing, kind of same pacing as well to it. So again, it's a fine song. I do like it a lot. Now, let's talk about the track Dirty Dorothy, which is actually the bonus track that's only exclusive to the Massacre Records pressing that was released in Europe. So, this song, well, while they definitely kind of neglected from doing songs that was at least had references to at least sex and so on, and just whatever parts of females' abdomens or whatever private parts. Well, Dirty Dorothy is probably the one exception, because of while it's only exclusive to the Massacre Records pressing, they still weren't able to kind of put away at least the very sex-tinged lyrics. So Dirty Dorothy really is one where they definitely flirted with that. It's kind of, in some cases, you can say could be close to their Whole Lotta Rosie in some cases in terms of its themes, but it's still, it's definitely a more sex-tinged lyric kind of track. And again, I don't hate the song at all. Again, it's a goofy fucking track, fun, dumb, but again, it's Anvil, and again, I do enjoy the track. So there you go. There is the 10th studio album from Anvil, Plenty of Power there. So after this album, for sure, Ivan Hurd would stay in the band until Back to Basics, and he would leave the band, and now they would get being a three-piece. And so Glenn Five at least would stay in the band until 2011 Juggernaut of Justice, and he would eventually end up getting replaced by, let me kind of find this guy, because he only was on Hope in Hell, but it was Sal Italiano is his name. Apparently he actually played in the band Cities, actually. So he would replace Glenn Five, and then again he wouldn't last very long, and Sal Italiano would leave the band, and he would then get replaced by the guy who's now the bass player in the band right now, and who was in the band when I saw them back in 2019. Again, that would be, let me go to here, would be Chris Robertson. So he would be the Robertson. Hopefully I corrected that. So he's pretty much been their bass player since Anvil is Anvil from 2016. So there you go. There is Plenty of Power. Again, it has reached its 20th anniversary. Again, originally released on April 3rd, 2001. If you have any sort of memories or any thoughts on this album, I mean, if you were there when this album came out, if you have any thoughts on the album, and even if your thoughts have kind of changed over time on this album, do you, again, if your original thoughts were when this album was released being whether or not you thought the album was good, or you thought the album was a little lackluster, or if you've changed on those opinions where you feel at first you liked the album but you don't like the album now, or at times you hated the album when it came out but you now appreciate the album now, again, you can leave those comments in the comment section below. But if you haven't heard this album, well, even though if you want a good idea of modern, at least the 90s sort of period of Anvil, everything at least from Plugged and Permanent to at least still going strong, because Back to Basics was kind of the beginning of them going back to this, kind of going back to the roots of their sound in some cases. A really sort of return to the more sort of almost 1980s sort of sound, which they've been continuing on with. Again, This Is 13, Juggernaut of Justice, and Hope in Hell, and Pounding the Pavement, and even Legal at Last. They've been at least continuing the sort of at least their sound. They've been at least since the 1980s, that sort of classic sound. Whereas albums like with, again, like Plenty of Power, they definitely were kind of updating a little bit of their sound, even not so much some of their riffs in terms of their attack and their approach. Everything is somewhat still the same, it's just sounds a little different. So if you want a good idea of that kind of sound, this isn't too bad. But I would say albums like Absolutely No Alternative or even Speed of Sound are probably better in some cases. You really should check out. Unplugged and Permanent is an absolute ridiculous fucking record where they really went even more over the top in terms of their lyrical themes. That ham, ooh, even though I actually do kind of, I'm guilty of liking it, at the same time, they really went far out with some of the lyrics on that album. So, there you go. There is my thoughts on Plenty of Power. So, it's time to announce what is going to be next week's Album of the Week. And let's definitely pull up my phone because I've got the scheduling for next week's Album of the Week pick, which will go to Come and Get It from Whitesnake. That is going to be next week's Album of the Week pick because it's going to reach its 40th anniversary. So that's one of the reasons. So there you go. That is going to be next week's Album of the Week pick. So right now, I hope all of you enjoyed this week's, or at least all of you at least like this week's Album of the Week pick. So with that, hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.